Now, today I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Sandra Rodriguez, an award-winning artist, researcher, and pioneer in emergent media, whose work pushes the boundaries of how we think about technology, creativity, and the human experience. Dr. Sandra Rodriguez is a multidisciplinary artist working at the intersection of art, technology, and the human experience. She's the winner of Canada's 2025 Governor General Awards in Visual Arts. She is recognized for pioneering in emergent media. She's trained as a filmmaker and a sociologist of new media technology, PhD. Dr. Sandra Rodriguez creates groundbreaking and thought-provoking experiences that garner multiple awards, including a Peabody, a New Mix, Best VR Lipsych, UNVR, and the Gold Nicker at Arts Electronica. She likes to divert intended uses of big data tracking, machine learning, generative AI, or large language models to explore pitfalls, potential, and suggest new uses in unexpected forms, from AI augmented ballet to multi-user games on cognition, to museal installations on data, sex, and desire, to exploring historical figures and evaluating AI's impact on biodiversity. Dr. Rodriguez is a Sundance Story Lab Fellow, a Sundance Institute and MacArthur Nonfiction Grantee, and founded and taught Hacking VR at the MIT. This is MIT's first official curriculum on emergent media. She creates work today that speaks about issues that will affect us all tomorrow. Our theme today for this conversation is governing imagination, ethics, power, and artist agency in AI. We'll explore how artists can influence AI governance and what it means to imagine ethical futures for technology, and how creative practice can help rebalance that power in AI development. We'll spend 30 to 40 minutes in conversation with Dr. Rodriguez and then open the floor for 20 minutes of a Q&A. So please feel free to start adding your questions in the Q&A box from now. So Dr. Sandra, let's begin with your connection to Electric South. We are happy to have a relationship with Dr. Rodriguez. You've engaged with our responsible AI webinars and our toolkit before. What struck you about the conversations from 2023, and how do they connect with your own work now?
I think my connections in 2023, thank you, first of all, for the mouthful biography and opening. I think it goes to show that the field is quickly evolving. There's so many players involved, from academia to researchers to artists to visual arts recognitions that don't really know how to place themselves. And I think Electric South showed all of that. Suddenly we had filmmakers, visual artists, sculptors, people who really came from the video world or a video clip world or music world that really tried to understand the new tools, their new potentials, and sometimes the new field that they mean, because the artificial intelligence in particular, as other emergent media, are not just tools, but they're also not a plethora of, divine intervention that's going to change the entire world as we're often promoted to be. It's an entire let's call it more of a field. For me, it's a field. It's a way to inhabit space, but it's also a way to think what art and creation means. And it's redefining a lot of the playground. Whenever we say a playground where a collectivity of artists, thinkers, academicians meet, when we say it's shifting, that means power struggles. And so, in a way, the entire topic of discussion today, I got really inspired at Electric South in 2023 because suddenly we had to face the reality. There's kind of the myth about artificial intelligence. We're told we should fear the change. It's going to change everything. You have no choice. But we're not told who we should fear. Why should we fear that change? Maybe because we're not in control. Okay, therefore, who is in control? And why are they not sharing that control? So I felt that finally the conversation was shifting to, well, who holds the primary means, for instance, of what all this technology is based on? And suddenly we start to see that power struggles are problematic and that they can be challenged. And I just felt the inspiration I got in 2023 in particular was to really think of the future that's ahead as starting now, and the future that's ahead not only involves the African continent, but is led by the African continent, demographically, statistically, and in thinking future that is different from what's imposed. So in many formats, in many ways, I got inspired by artists and thinkers that know this and don't need to be taught into thinking this because they live it every day, so they understand it better than anyone else. And it gave me food for thought for even my work today, where I keep rethinking who are going to be our partners when we need to scout for clean data. And what I mean by clean data is untethered or unowned by big corporations like Google, for instance. Can we collaborate with artists that really focus on independence of the data? And if so, who, you know? And suddenly it's not rethinking your collaborators always so locally for your own vicinity or community or country, but sometimes thinking across the globe. Maybe there's somebody somewhere in another country that's actually already doing the work. It just helped me rethink of an ecosystems of humans that are using tools and inhabiting digital spaces. And what are they going to choose to do with it, and not what are we told we should be do or not be doing with it. That's kind of where I laid the conversation in 2023. And again, so it kind of lends it to today's topics, which is agency, an artist's agency. Why are we maybe the ones um, bridging the gap between what can be done and how it will be used in the future.
I mean, that's exactly why we do the work here at Electric South.
Mhm.
I think from 2023, the co-founders Ingrid and Stephen recognized that people in the immersive community, they straddle this world of the creative arts as well as technology in a way that many other artistic people, don't do. And so that's why they decided from 2023 that actually this new technology or this new field, as you put it, AI, is coming around the corner, and we are one of the communities that should be talking about it. So I'm very glad that we started that conversation in 2023, started the advocacy around that, and that we are now speaking today. Could you then expand on your current explorations with AI and perhaps share some of the ways you've diverted its intended uses?
So I think it always is helpful to maybe use a couple of images. So if you don't mind, I'm going to use some images as the backbone so that when I mention immersive experiences, immersive experience it could be reading a book, it could be being in a room with a lot of video projections, or it could be virtual reality. There's so many ways that we could talk about extended reality experiences or emergent media. So I'd like to share a couple of visuals just to situate us all into what type of work I've been doing and since when. But the journey with artificial intelligence really didn't start for me now. It started way back, and I'm going to show you maybe with some images it may help. So let me just give a second here to um, share said images. It started way back just because I thank you for your introduction. Again, you've presented me in my dual personality. It's always as a researcher, I've had to um, kind of hide the fact that my day-to-day living and bread earning was as an artist and not because of necessarily always teaching or being affiliated to a university. But as I was doing, for instance, my PhD in sociology, I was really interested in the data that keeps getting tracked with social media and how people can use this as social change. For instance, how activists would share not necessarily specific themes on social media, but sometimes keywords embedded and sometimes even hidden within a text message. Why? Because data tracking existed, and data tracking existed by tracking words and not showing you that it was tracking words. So people would, for instance, write a word white on a white background so you don't see it in the image, but it's actually being tracked. And they know this. So there were so many ways to understand how a system affiliated with a technology worked, and a lot of activists were using it to disrupt the way they're forced into a sort of consumption of these social media technologies, to reshape the way their message gets conveyed and to whom and how broadly, for instance. And I kept thinking about, I still have that curiosity for things that are imposed, and I really call it imposed. It's not a choice or a collective choice to go in certain directions. It's often economical choices, but the aftermath of which have been planned 50 years in the making. So it's imposed choices where instead of being, like a toddler, instead of being told you have the entire world at your feet, you're told, do you want the red one or the blue one? And you have to choose between the two pills. But these are imposed choices. And as an artist, often I also had to hide the fact that I was doing research because as an artist, your goal is not to demonstrate, educate. Your role is to talk about today, right? It's to engage audiences and a public into rethinking the now. And for me, both of them go so well hand in hand because the now has a plethora of ways that we could redefine what's at stake today for our societies. And there's a lot of data, there's data tracking, there's algorithms making decisions, there's automation of things that maybe we know how to do best and maybe the systems can now do faster. There's what we call artificial intelligence, and there's myths in there about what's intelligence and what isn't considered intelligence, or human intelligence for that matter. And then there's the entire virtuality or amplification, is supposed to be what a human can do, who decides what that is, and then what we determine is actually amplified by systems or machines. And so all of these questionings about what does it mean to be human today, what's our human experience today, is so tethered to questions about who controls the technologies that are supposed to be defining this. So in a way, the way to debunk a lot of these myths from a researcher investigation point of view, from an activist point of view, or from an artist point of view are the same. What is it that's at stake? Who has control over it? What are the power struggles? And where does that situate us humans? And of course, we have experimentation. I do a lot of mindful prototyping. What I mean by mindful prototyping is instead of just testing to ensure you have a good product, which a lot of people in video game industry or virtual reality industries will do, it's more, can you demonstrate the prototyping at stake so people understand the failures of all of these systems? Can your work demonstrate all the failures you've encountered so that we learn that the end result is not magical? Humor and play, of course, because if you disrupt anything, better do it in a way that makes people at least smile. And a lot of the meta approaches mean to show that it's not just one hiccup of a technology, it's often an entire powerful system that's been um, establishing itself step by step until where we are today. The entire goal, and I'm bringing back to the title of the presentation today, is about imagination. This is all, let's say, themes that are important to discuss and debunk. But I often like to come back to ground zero, and that's just what makes us a particular animal species that we are. And we are a species of imagination and connection. We like to be together. We enjoy thinking things that don't really exist. And we like to think them together. It teaches us lessons. It's used to tell us about who we are, or our past history, our culture, but it's also guiding us to think about our future often. It gives us a collective way of thinking what's not existent yet. And so that for me is the role of the artist. And independent artists in this field of emerging tools, emerging technologies, and artificial intelligence, even more than ever, have to be the voice that help us think, what if it was a little bit different? What if it's not exactly what we're told it should be or what we should fear? What if it could be something radically different? So the projects up to date, for instance, for a project called The Big Picture on the left, we collaborated with the United Nations in Ghana, where they used tracking data, but instead of using it for advertising, it was to see where is the price of millet rising or the price of rice really lowering quickly and abruptly. That meant Boko Haram was in the region. So they could know and understand patterns of social dynamics, power structures, conflict from economical prices shifting. Do not track, I mentioned this because Brett Gaylor is going to be speaking next. Do Not Track was a project directed by Brett Gaylor where different people in different countries focused on different aspects of big data or data tracking or what it meant for an entire economy based on data. Uh, then, of course, it's moving into virtual reality projects that use tools like or engines like this engine. It's made in Unity that are usually considered or were considered for video games, but in this case, we tried to demonstrate the feeling of being stuck in a cycle of manic depression. And of course, from gamified tools to heavy subjects, you can talk about social issues by using tools that are not meant for this purpose, but of course, artists will disrupt it to rethink its purpose. And from then to work done now, in 2016, I was teaching at MIT already. So I started in 2015 to teach a class at MIT, and it was great. I could teach engineers, people that were, it's the technological mecca. They're there because they want to reinvent the tools themselves or benefit from inventing the new app that everybody's going to be downloading on their phones. I was at the mecca of this kind of technological race. And I loved having to help some of these students think of a creative project. And at the beginning, for them, creative meant use the tool to output art. And they quickly realized that didn't really work that well. The reactions of individuals were a little bit disappointed. And in a way, the entire goal of having a creative class was for them to rethink what thinking about a tool means. So it's not necessarily how to best sell it, how to make it profitable, or how to ensure most people are using it. Maybe it's showing what's wrong with it in the first place. Maybe it's showing uh, what does it mean about us as a society that we focus on such aspects. So what you see on the top part is an experience that started being ideated while at MIT in 2016, and then got presented in different iterations. The project is called Chomsky versus Chomsky. It was presented in a first format at Sundance in 2020, then another collective collaborative format in Berlin in 2022, then another more gamified format at Quartier des Spectacles in Montreal in 2023. And in a way, I'm still invited often to talk about this project. It's an old project. AI has been shifting a lot through the making of this project. But I like to recall the making of this project often because it's rare in this very evanescent world of emergent media that we have something that has sustained and adapted through time from 2016 in the world of AI, that is a decade ago, to maybe 2025. So that's actually literally 9 years, 9 years of evolution of AI systems and how we actually even rethink how we're housing the data, if we're using online services or cloud services like Microsoft Azure, which we're no longer doing for many reasons. It's rethinking the impacts of the efficiency of the tools, but even what they mean. If you're there to demonstrate um, how tethered the technology is to the way we're thinking, and suddenly you're stuck using an online platform like Microsoft Azure, then you're not free. And if it's about freedom, then maybe we need to rethink what the system is based on. And last but not least, recent projects to the bottom are, for instance, sex desires and data or future rights. In the first part, the goal is really to rethink where the data comes from. We see all these chat, artificial intelligence system that we converse with, but we seldom think about where does all the data um, is derived from. And often we say it's from the web, but it's not necessarily only the web. It's whatever's readily, sorry about my English, readily available online, which means pornography, our personal, intimate images, videos, family portraits, whatever that can mean, anything we share on social media, and of course, any pirated content. That's what's most readily available. Recently, there's a court order that asked Google to share where their data comes from with other companies to ensure that they don't have a monopoly over the economy of data. but strangely, they're not still not obliged to share it with the public. I just think that's great to know that they have to share with our data with other companies, but they're not obliged to share it with us. And of course, that leads me to other projects such as Future Rights, where the goal is to use technologies used again in video games, but also in police, predictive policing, like a gait analysis to understand how each individual moves so that we take that data and make it into a dance experience. And what my surprise is that I often start small because I speak with somebody working in video game industry, or I attending a conference and I get triggered because everybody seems to agree that what we're hearing is as the future of how we're going to use the technology is just accepted. And I'm often thinking, according to whom?
Mm,
I see the uniformity of the people in the audience and I see the uniformity of the people speaking. And when they all agree that there's only one way future is going to head towards, I get triggered. I want to second guess it. I want a second opinion, let's say. And so I'm surprised that the most responsive that I've heard recently are museums. Museums like Museo Nacional del Prado in Spain or Museo das Amazônias in Brazil that want to start conversations with the audience and not just apply whatever big firms, big technological firms, or big marketing industries are suggesting is the future, but have real conversations about where we want it to head, we as the general audience, and how we may disrupt it before they even get to sell it to us. Giving you again some maybe this time visual and audio examples about how these experiences look like. Chomsky versus Chomsky is the one that's most evident as an example because it's long lasting and again it's a almost 9 years journey now. But the experience is using Noam Chomsky's digital archives as well as real archives to have a data set of Chomsky, actual Chomsky quotes, sayings, thoughts, relations to words and ideas. And the experience invites us to demystify how artificial intelligence works by
mm,
looking at its backend. How does it connect tokens? How does these turns into words? And how do you feel like you're in a conversation? And
mm,
of course, why Noam Chomsky? Well, he is the thought leader on conversations, language, and what it means to rethink power structures within conversations. Let me just play this for you. Let's hope you hear it.
I think the hardest thing about communication is understanding the intended meaning of the message. And an ambulation of voice and language patterns is Professor Chomsky.
So I like the last bit, right? That it says question everything.
mm,
That is kind of my prerogative for artists, but also for anybody using these technologies. Um, it can work in a certain manner, but it could work in more manners. And how it does is often a decision which you're not part of. So nobody tells you that you have to use it the way it's intended. In the case of Chomsky versus Chomsky, the biggest takeaway from a lot of our audience members were this: we just allowed them to talk with a Chomsky AI that responded. And the first part of the interaction, they engaged in a conversation. At the beginning, like we do with all chatbots, testing it. And the more and engage with it, more like playfully engaging in a conversation, knowing that it's not a real individual, but trying to go into humor and connectivity, because that's what human uh, brains do. We like to connect with others. So, and we like to be playful at it. But once we got into a second part of the experience where they started to be able to see how Chomsky constructed its answers. A lot of them told us it's so bad. I mean, it's just inventing the next word. It doesn't mean what it says. And I thought, bingo, it will never mean what it says. It's just using a series of tokens to predict what you're expecting to see as the next word. Not what should be the next word, but what it's expecting to have to and what it's expecting you to want because it's taking it from the World Wide Web. But again, the World Wide Web is not just a free field of data. It's a structured, hierarchical set of data where there's already algorithms from 20 years of using, search engines that have already skewed the playing field. It's already going to go for very biased information first. And then if it doesn't find it there, it's going to find more. So it's kind of feeding not only bias, but feeding on its own bias to give you answers that get more and more biased. So in a way to show them that, it could have said in this example, uh, the definition of human intelligence, but it is typically or generally or often, you can see here it's just an evaluation of what's the next word that fits better. But sometimes it prompted people to really realize that when it says your question is really interesting, it could have easily switched to is really boring. And the meaning of the information is completely drastically different. What was the second takeaway was we had a lot of games. It was collaborative. And people had the most fun playing games than talking with a chatbot. And I slipped that in on purpose. Even though they felt like the game was a teaching about how AI works, it was actually showing them that I never gave these humans rules. And yet they figured they could play together and solve a problem together without being told any rule. AI systems cannot do any of that. They cannot have empathy for each other, and they don't know how to collaborate. They know how to follow directions and compete. That they know how to do very well. And the experiences in its different iterations and format was also conceived to have people engage with each other so that as they're waiting to put on a virtual reality headset, they can talk to each other. They have spaces where they can question their own prerogatives on AI, what they liked, what they didn't like about the experience. And often, even in Montreal, we try to do this in a very manual form that it's wood and that it's not virtual. Why? Because the way our brains work are still related to our senses. Smell, touch, collectivity, wood, materials. Our brains react differently when we're enabled to physically play with things than we're just as in this virtual talk, one virtually in a space and the other virtually in another space. We can still listen to what I have to say, but I'm sure it's not the same as if we were face to face, as if we were able to smell each other, touch each other, sense even the heat of another presence in the same room. Our brains react differently and they learn a lot better when they are physically present. So it leaves me to my end of not of the conversation, but of just presenting what I do for a living. I think the question that I want us to also be debating and that I try to attack with or tackle with my work is what kind of artists are we? We've had artists that just want to demonstrate a confrontation with the past, and we often hear in AI conversations that art is just taking from the past, reshuffling it, and showing something new. I don't think it is. Art is a conversation in and of itself. You have something to share, you have something to convey. What is it that we want to convey with these tools or without them? And the question therefore becomes, what are you going to do with it? When I was saying I'm often triggered by conversation, I heard an entire presentation where they were saying, don't try to, same as you, it was pointless to try to Google yourself first. Now people are trying to figure out what ChatGPT can say about them, and it often fails. But stop doing it because it uses a lot of resources unnecessarily, and B, it won't tell you. That's not the way it works. It won't tell you specifically what you're expecting. And so the message was, don't try to search for yourself with these AI tools. And I thought, let me do exactly that. I don't like being told what not to do. I may have a problem with authority, but we'll ask my parents about that later in life. I was going to say, I was triggered. Why is it that they're so trying to say, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it? And I thought, let's just play a game. And I presented this to a 5-year-old, and the 5-year-old was able to associate the AI generated image on the top with the images on the bottom. So I'm not telling her what the process is. I'm just saying which image goes with which. And she saw a connection with the top left to the bottom right, let's say for the middle one, I'm looking away. There's a picture I'm looking away. There's one where I have squares around my eyes, and then there's a picture with squares. And then there's one where you can even see the smirk, where the smile goes, the side, the parting of the hair. The 5-year-old got it right. But then I asked AI researchers and I asked a technologist that I'm working with, how do you think I got these images? And they're saying, well, you used your image and then you changed it. That's not how I did it. I just used my bio, just a text bio. That's it. How did it generate images that are so closely related to how my bio has changed over time? Whenever we do a presentation like I'm doing today, we have a biography and it's often associated to an event. And we're also asked to share an image of ourselves for promotion of the event. And often, if you're lazy like I am, you don't change your photo for a couple of years. And you don't change your bio for a couple of events. And so I personally know which image is associated to which bio, but I've never told any system use these images. I'm just using a biography. But quickly, if I'm asking it, here is the biography, I'm saying, can you find the image? I'm saying, here is the biography. Can you generate an image of, I'm using the biography as a prompt, generate an image of professor, blah, 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 and I have the entire bio. And it generates images where it clearly has been looking for my image online. It clearly has been using the bio to find similar text online and found an associated image to that similar text and then tried to generate on the basis of that text. Otherwise, a 5-year-old could not see the pattern. But a 5-year-old was able to see the pattern, and AI researchers couldn't explain how it got to this point. And I'm just thinking, trust your gut. The role of the artist sometimes is to do exactly what we're not told not to do, maybe because it can show you how systems function. You can start to discern what's not told out loud about how these system functions and where you're getting, let's say, wrapped up into conversations where we're not talking about the basics. And often when we hear discussions on artificial intelligence, you can see the way we talk about either the systems or artificial intelligence in and of itself. You can see what's the prerogative, what's the bias, the intellectual bias of the person speaking. How we talk about AI matters. Sebastian Thrun, for instance, was suggesting a New York Times article, which I thought was great. You could really see the two kind of power dynamics at play. One is suggesting that steam engine is to the muscle, AI is to the brain. So in a way, your brain functions in a way, and then AI just makes it faster, better, stronger. And it also suggests that it's possible at some point that it will be superior to human artists. And I'm already knowing that this is not an artist because an artist will not define art by superior or inferior. It's a subjective form of conveying something. So there is no stronger, better, faster art that just doesn't exist. But for that person, we can already identify that stronger, better, faster are things that are necessarily, for the good of our societies. While on the right, you have Rumen Shauhurdi that suggests that she believes there's something fundamental when we speak about humanity that we can't replicate machine. And she also suggests that we've been legendarily terrible at recognizing intelligence in other humans and even in other species and offering it compassion. So in a way, you can see that the way we talk, and I'm going to stop sharing here, um, the way we talk about artificial intelligence shows that there's not just imagination about what they mean, who should be using them, how, for which purpose, what's good use of AI and bad use of AI. But we could really throw the baby out with the water. There's such a big part of the conversations that's I call it commercial talk. And it's as though we are listening to an advertising, just a publicity stunt, and we're debating it as this is our future, it's not our future. And for me, it's the publicity stunt. It's the sales representative telling you what it should be. But then when you get to your own home, do with it what you goddamn please. It's a tool that's sold to us at a very high cost. And the cost is partly our freedom. So before we just decide to dig into it, I suggest use it. debunk it, use it for something else. Try to see its limitations, and when there is a limit, dig into that limitation as much as you can, because it may show you exactly, the dark angle that suddenly you're just realizing this is where I have leverage and power. If you can't, walk through the front door, walk through the window or through the back door, there's always a way in. And that's the role artists should be, is pointing at to all the cracks and all the facades. Yeah, so you just asked the simple questions, but before we engage in this conversation, we thought it's good that people get visual support sometimes, just to know a little what we're talking about and what it means. I hope this kind of gives a bit of a layout of the field that I'm playing in at the moment.
I'm gonna just clap there because this has been really, really fantastic. It's been very encouraging. I think as artists, we often feel like we're late to the conversation. And I love the way you put it, where you said, no, we have to give a second opinion, and there hasn't been a second opinion. So there's
Hmm.
been a lot of one opinion, and I love the way you put it. A lot of one people in the room, a lot of the sales pitch. And now it's for artists to come and give a second opinion on the use cases of AI, on unpacking and debunking and figuring it out. And you've put it so well. It's been like a masterclass of learning. I'm so encouraged that there's people like yourself who are from an artistic background, from a sociology background, playing with this tech and reminding us that the train is actually not left, like it's not left the station. And that's very much what we're told about AI policy
Hmm.
is, I think left, right, and center, everyone is getting bombarded with updates about decisions that have been made, not knowing that, no, the decision is not complete if a whole demographic of people have not weighed in. And artists have often been those people to remind us what technology is in the human experience. So I've really appreciated. And you've given us so much language for being able to say, no, I actually still have something to add. No,
Hmm.
we need to rethink this. Thank you so much about that. And I
And
think, oh
go ahead.
yes.
No, no, I was
Oh,
going to say thank you for being so patient and listening to all of
no,
it.
this has been fantastic because, like I say, this is exactly the work that we do at Electric South. And as you know, Electric South is just a small NGO with, I guess, big ambitions. And oftentimes we've been putting it forward that artists, we need to come in and say, what is the use case for AI? Don't let it be defined just by the people who created the tech. And often we are given this sort of script of, well, too much has already been said, too much has already been done. And I think this, like I said, you've given us a masterclass in language, which is also what we're doing with the series, is removing that intimidation, allowing people to feel like, no, I can step into the room, making these discussions a little more artist-centered. I think it's very important. It does lead me to my next question.
Mhm.
Um, and I think off of that, how do you see artists then influencing ethical AI in practice? What unique role does imagination play in shaping regulation and ethics? And that's why I say you've given the masterclass on it. Perhaps you could unpack it further.
I love that question because um, it's often been, especially with AI, a clear paradox. In a way, we're told artificial intelligence, we were told even in 2013, I remember discussions about where the future is heading and where artificial intelligence is going to be heading. And part of these conversations are we're always demonstrating analysis, use cases in health, how it could help predict policing better, how it can predict diseases better, and then to show that it had a human touch, that
Mm,
it was not just a system of data analysis, not just a Excel sheet on steroid. They kept insisting maybe it also has like a feeling, and to convey the sense of feeling, it would demonstrate AI art. Every time I felt triggered because I thought if artists were all about making something that makes you feel like it's beautiful and good, a lot of it would be, birthday postcards. Like, I'm not sure that's how art has evolved. Just it is an attraction to beauty, but it often goes in a conversation of beauty versus telling, versus sharing a human experience versus opposing. Art has often been political. It's not just demonstrating the way things are and beauty. It's showing beauty in the ugly and sometimes ugly in the beauty. And I think just that in and of itself is paradoxical. AI is demonstrated as efficient, but to close conversations and tell you, and it also has a little bit of a human side to it. They show the creative outputs you could do with AI. But then, so it became kind of the little nice, aftermath of a bigger thought. But since people are creating with AI, it took the bigger hold. Generative AI, generative images, generative videos are taking the bigger hold of the entire AI economical future. Suddenly, it's not about predicting diseases anymore, and it's not about making better decisions out of big chunks of data. Suddenly, it's used to generate images and videos. And I'm just thinking, isn't this like a paradoxical cycle where all of a sudden you were saying, oh, how cute it is that some people want to create with it, but once individuals had a hold of it, the first thing they wanted to do is convey what's in their minds through imagination of images and videos. And it got so popular that suddenly that's where the money's at, and everybody's shifting to these systems. Now, again, there's another paradox. These generative images and videos also have a very problematic toll on the environment. They are the most polluting form of AI. And I'm stuck sometimes in great inspiring conversations with researchers, AI researchers that are telling you, you could also just use a locally stored AI system on your computer that doesn't use that much resources and is quite effective. You don't need the generative stuff. That's just taking everything it can gulp from the internet to have the most precise, accurate, real feeling image. But what about, or something that's inspired from other types of representations, for instance, painting or animations or anime, etc. It doesn't have to be realistic, I mean, but it has to be realistic in a sort of format that we understand or know. But what about the rest? What about predicting diseases? Why is suddenly all the funds for this type of research cut while the other gets, the bigger part of the pie? And partly it's because as soon as creativity got involved, it didn't become the little afterthought. It became the leader, of where the economy of AI may lead us. And suddenly everybody's focused just on that. So artists suddenly are surprisingly holders of the power and not so much replaceable. Suddenly the conversation went from, the first jobs to go are going to be artists because that's so easy to replace creation of images. And suddenly the conversation has gone to actually artists have creativity, and creativity is the skill that you will need in tomorrow's future. I'm just not saying which is true and which is going to be false. I'm just kind of a little bit taking a step back when you see these conversations unravel. It's as though you could see the seams of the stitching all of a sudden. You can really see the seams, and the seam tells you we thought we could get rid of you. Now we realize how much money there is to be made out of your creativity. Maybe now we need you. And now it's programmers we're told we no longer will need programmers or technologists for that matter, because as long as you use the technology the way we sell it to you, you don't need them to rethink the backbone and programming. So we're always told who's going to leave, who's going to stay, who's going to be important, who's not going to be important. And the question of artists should still be why? Like who gets to choose? Why are we told who's going to stay and who, should leave? Why couldn't we all stay? Why should we be imposed a way of thinking, not by the technologist even doing the conceptualizations of systems, but by the companies that benefit from a technology at a fixed point in time? So it's a very kind of yeah, putting a lot of pressure, I'm guessing, on the role of shoulder of artists. But if we can be more like specific, the Door brothers are video clip directors that have been using AI recently to demonstrate kind of the yeah, the hypocrisy of our times. For instance, making a video of deepfake influencers that are not actually influencers or AI generated influencers talking about the state of the world, and you can see how bad the state of the world is. So there's a lot of social critique in their videos, and they're using the tool, but also to talk about the hypocrisy of our current world system and how it's benefiting from our downfall. In a way, I do think it's quite interesting as a provocation, but you could also, before I knew who exactly were the Door brothers or their background, you could see that it's attention grabbing and not an artistic conveying of a message. Why? Because there is no question in the, for instance, output itself. How come a lot of these explosion, fires, and destroyed cities images are so easy to generate? And why is a crowd rushing to save itself so easy to generate? And why are protests so easy to generate? But what happens if you're asking them to do a dance protest? It's not so easy to generate. Because our world is filled with images of destruction, fires, entire, wiped out cities, entire wiped out population, people being displaced. So in a way, it's easy to generate because these images are everywhere online for a reason. And that's where I can see like the difference between the engaged artist and the commercial artist is maybe that the engaged artist would have addressed the source of the data it's using. And the source of the data is not just the downfall and comical downfall of our society, but the fact that we're stuck in a kind of very strange times where we have to use certain tools to be able to talk to other humans. And we know the power these tools hold over these, the consequence of these disasters, conflicts, power dynamics. So we have to use the tool to talk about their aftermath. Maybe that's why artists should do exactly the same, use the tools to talk about their problematic effects on our society, but maybe don't use it exactly as it's supposed to be. Maybe, don't use ChatGPT. Just understand that there's parallel systems. Hugging Face is a company that will demonstrate and promote an open software, open systems. Everybody can use what's there, so you can disrupt it, change it. So there's alternative ways to use the technology to disrupt it. You don't have to just buy in. You could partially buy in the logic to show how the logic is obfuscating, uh, what should be told. So that's how I see the role of the artist. So it's a super long-winded answer. It's not an easy one because I struggle with it every day. It's not as though I know exactly, how to put on my armor and fight each day, but sometimes it goes with listening, closely listening in the conversation and realizing who's speaking. What do they have to get benefit from convincing me I should buy in? And realizing that somebody's benefiting from you being left out.
I think this is incredibly empowering. I think that when artists watch this, they will feel a bit more empowered because a lot of the conversation happening is doom and gloom because
Mhm,
there is this, I guess, this tension, this fallacy that's telling artists that you're almost not required to be in the conversation anymore. And to hear you, it's exactly what you said. The reason why we saw the explosion in the use is because people recognize that human experience and it's going to be artists that translate that. So I think this is, yeah, absolutely fantastic. On to, I guess my next question is then, how, when we know about these tensions between creativity, regulation, and imagination, how do we then um, bring these more diverse views, these more artist-centered views, I guess even African artist-centered views into the global discussion? You know, if
mhm,
artists are not sitting at the table, they're not invited to the table, they're not in the rooms, that even I guess yourself is, how how do we move that dominance from the corporate and technocratic voices into the hands of artists who I think more are representative of, you know, the rest of humanity?
mhm. I think I, if I had the answer, we would, be so happy that, the answer is so easily graspable. I think knowledge is, myth is power, but so is knowledge. So demystifying is democratizing.
Mm,
Any conversation like Electric South is doing about artificial intelligence and getting more people to debate how it's working, but understanding that even though it feels ethereal and it feels like a new way of doing things, it's built on uh, material and economical realities. And what I mean by material, sometimes I'm just thinking the global south holds all the mines of lithium. That's just an example. They're profited from by the global north. And, partly all of these AI systems are using a lot of material resources and human resources that are in the global south. If education is key, it's also key to understand that
mm,
if tomorrow's half of the population and tomorrow's 70% of the populations decides that the North no longer has control over these lithium mines, over these cheap laborers being asked to step in and correct AI systems or images and image prediction. It doesn't have the power over, it has the power, I mean, over deciding where cooling factories, even in the north, there's regions that are being exploited just because suddenly they no longer have drinkable water system because it's used to cool AI farms, data farms. If communities understand the power they have to say no, all
mm,
this future crumbles. All this future that is relating on stealing data, uh, cheap labor, using data farms in places where communities are most vulnerable, and using mines of materials that they just exploit. There's, that's the that's the toughest answer would be, well, just know that demographically, the ones that are holding the power are less in numbers,
mm,
and they're getting more and more power by less and less people. In a way, just understanding these facts, making sure that you understand your capacity to say no. Like you've said quite eloquently, we're told artists are no longer part of the conversation. In a way, we've never been part of the conversation. And in a way, a lot of our communities have not been part of the conversations for centuries now. And we're fed up. And I think that sentiment of being fed up of not being part of the conversation, added to powers in numbers and education about the power struggles, I think is the key to get a step ahead and perhaps change entire systems. I was mentioning before, um, locally stored data. For data systems to work, we're told, we need vast amount of data. That um, colonialist, I'll call it, logic is the same as if you were to say, I need to find sardines. And because I need sardines, I'm going to have the biggest net I can ever find and scrape the entire sea to get my sardines. That is a flawed logic. It's a very colonialist logic that just takes whatever it takes because as long as I get the sardines, I'm fine. But it doesn't think about the consequences for, all communities surrounding that sea. It's the same that applies today with artificial intelligence. Bigger is better is always a logic that goes with the
mm,
idea of getting all the data you need, but it's not necessarily more efficient. Speaking of Hugging Face and speaking of these questioning these logics, Sasha Luciani is a Montreal-based um, lead of AI and environmental impact at Hugging Face. And she often repeats that if people were to start small on their own computer with locally stored systems and their
mm,
own data that is protected and not put online for Google, Amazon, Microsoft, to take a hold on. If you were to use, for instance, a community-based scouting of images, and you store it locally with a locally stored AI system, you can start to really see how it works. You can get great results with it, and you don't have to share this with OpenAI or, Claude or Anthropic. These can be your own systems and your own AI. She
mm,
was suggesting this just for the environmental impact, but what about cultural impact? What about I love to name drop Tonji, who was one of the participants in the 2023 gathering of Electric South. And his idea was to take Benin artifacts that have been stolen and rethink through local images and local culture. How can I see and train a system to see patterns in images, fabric, fashion, patterns of images of today? Can I see things that are relevant to missing parts of an artifact that has been stolen? Maybe that's one way to redeem your own ancestry and your own lineage of imagination. If you were going to ask ChatGPT about it, it's just going to feed back to you
Mm,
whatever images have been gathered by data files from same people who stole the artifacts in the first place. So it's their mind views and worldviews that are hier I don't know how to say this in English properly, putting in a hierarchy, it's really a hard word, hiérarchiser the entire data systems just to ensure that things that they deem most important are labeled as most important. But if we want to decolonize that mindset, part of it is really to rethink what's the data that's important to me? How do I
mm,
gather that data? Where do I store it and protect it? And so often it goes old school, don't go online. Just store it locally in a computer and maybe go to Hugging Face to find systems that can be stored locally. So the
mm,
aftermath on the environment is lesser, the ethical impact of where you get your data from is less, and the results are often so much more original than what we're used to seeing. That what's driving the entire community of people looking to the future of art with emerging tools, that drives their attention because it feels different. I think that's where artists really have power. Again, if you don't want to do what everybody else is doing, maybe don't do an advertisement as an artwork. Maybe think of artists like Sasha Stiles, who uses poetry in a way to help us think about how AI puts words together and how it's inevitably how humans read the text that makes the poem and not the way the words are assembled. There's a nice aunties that is doing videos on Instagram for social media feeds, but they're so inspired by Singaporean realities that we're not often faced with in commercial, let's say, social media videos, that it creates these weird AI generated images of old Singaporean ladies and infused with Singaporean culture. And suddenly everybody's, driving their attention to these images because it feels original. It feels like it's saying something different. So I don't have a say of how artists can, especially excluded communities from the conversation, will be able to take their proper place at the table. But just the way you've eloquently put it, the fact that we haven't been at the table for so long, and I'm saying we as so many forms of exclusion, the fact that we are not invited to have a say into how systems are being built means that we need to debuild them. We need to take them apart and rebuild them because otherwise we're always going to be left out. So perhaps how artists can do it is step by step, baby steps, understanding how systems are functioning, understanding the data. My last example would be from the suburbs of Paris, les banlieues. The suburbs in Paris have often been associated with discrimination because the way Parisians will talk about the suburbs is unhealthy, not clean, has a lot of crime, and there's a lot of bias in thinking about the banlieue. So an entire group of these suburbs decided to force feed into systems of image generation beautiful images of their neighborhoods and tagging it and retagging it and retagging it to the extreme with saying this is the banlieue parisienne just to counterfeit the images that any generative system would create that is not real and is just based um, on bias. So there's ways that you can counterfeit uh, when artists are told doubling their voice is used to, they're asked to double something because their voice will then be used to double any movie, for instance, voice artists, and they're fearing for their jobs. I'm always triggered to think, well, why don't you accept the job and make it the worst voice dubbing you could ever do? So that you train AI
Maybe.
system with crap. Like, I mean, you could definitely choose to do that. You know? Don't sell your soul. Sell what, don't sell your soul, just trick them. Outsmart the system. It's just a way that it's a game. It's a game, but it's a risky one if we're not part of it.
Sorry, I'm just gonna adjust my lighting because it is evening now. So I think I'll ask one more question and then we'll go to the questions in the chat. This has been, yeah, like I say, so empowering, so encouraging, yeah, a great conversation to be having. And part of the work that we are actually doing in our convening, this webinar series is leading up to an invite-only convening that's happening in Johannesburg, that Electric South is organizing. And part of the work that we hope to do in that convening is create a set of principles or guidelines coming from a group of technologists, researchers, artists on how we see AI working in our sector as immersive media community. And part of the reason we are doing that work is that we found that for a lot of artists, the conversation around AI and defending ourselves around AI keeps getting stuck
Mhm.
on intellectual property, on fears of replacement. And often that doesn't allow us to then jump further into the conversation. Like you said, own the conversation, unpack it, rebuild it, tell what's important. Um, for yourself, thinking about that, not saying that the
Mhm.
arguments around intellectual property aren't important, but for yourself, what other issues should artists be surfacing at this moment?
I like how you framed it because it's not that intellectual property is not important, is that it can even be used at a bigger scale. I'm often waiting for time to do its trick. You said before so well, it's not that the train has left the station. We could use the train metaphor in so many formats. For instance, we're constantly told we're going to miss the train, we're going to miss the train. And maybe sometimes changing the perspective or the way we see the train, we realize it's a toy train and it's going in circles. And in a way, you're not missing anything. You can kind of take a step back and realize time will take will do what it does best sometimes and just let things let the dust fall a little bit and you can see more clearly, actually, it's a toy train, and actually it's just going in circles. Ah, I see how to get my piece in the conversation. That's easy. Why I'm saying this is a couple of years ago, somebody asked me on in a radio show, live radio show, a tricky question, and I didn't know what to answer. And sometimes when you're live, you can either freeze or just say whatever you have on on your mind and not think about filters. That's what happened. So the question that I was asked was, considering we can deepfake anything, could anyone let deepfake, for instance, Star Wars and create so many videos of it? And, we could generate funds out of the images and videos generated from Star Wars, for instance. And we could not say anything because it's AI generated. Who holds the right of these images? And I thought, oh, well, that's the tricky part is I'm not a lawyer. I can't tell you what the law says, but I know for a fact that if we keep insisting on Pixar style or Disney style, or either they're going to ask for a cut
Hmm.
or they are going to stop that practice. And once we can no longer use collectively framed words to tell us styles and images. For instance, Pixar, or for instance, Disney, or for instance, brands. That's also intellectual property in a way. What's happening is that when we're talking about the intellectual property of the artist, it feels as though the artist needs to defend their past work and who's going to use it. We are the little ones in an entire system. But suddenly, when the conversations of IP are derived to huge companies, you know, multi-billion dollars industry companies, and they ask for their IP, the game is going to change.
Mm,
Partly, it's already happening. Partly, we can no longer have systems or apps that would have on the switch of a button uh, pixarize it, as I've seen in apps that were starting, for to generate images that would say that just put it in a Pixar style. Suddenly, that word cannot be used anymore. There's copyrights even on words and how you can use them. And I'm just thinking, time will settle groups that are more powerful that are going to start to ask for names not to be used like, Disney or artists' name such as, big Hollywood stars' name cannot be used for similarities. And I'm not saying we need to wait for the law to change our power dynamics because it always comes in too late and always in a very biased form. I'm saying it's not just a system and us little people. There's also bigger players that are getting either cut or are going to renegotiate. So, in a way, I think being able to let time do its thing sometimes helps. Realize there's already a fatigue of AI generated videos and images. It hasn't even been a year of successful images that don't have six fingers or, know how to properly have a character that is consistent from point A to point B. It hasn't even been a year, and we're already tired of seeing them.
mm,
That fatigue doesn't mean it's going to go away. It means what's deemed important may change. So keeping your originality, your creativity, ownership, not just of the original IP, but insisting that you can not look for best way to tweak what's readily available. For instance, if you're using any image generative system right now and you're asking it for a doctor, that's the famous example, and it's going to give you a white male doctor. And if you don't want it, you have to ask it specifically for how different of a white male doctor you want your character to be. So instead of playing that game, what if you did the exact opposite? What if you only fed a personal system with your own images? And suddenly that becomes the only thing you're using, or you're contradicting these results with results that are mainstreamly available and showing them side by side comparison. There's ways to ensure that you have not only ownership of data, but that you can point to where you don't have part of the conversation. You show side by side the difference. I think just demonstrating the flaws is the best way in. Um, yeah, and it's kind of I'm just reading as I'm speaking one of the comments, but it is like dealing not of a, it's a bottom up. It's realizing that sometimes, people who hold power start eating each other out. And sometimes that's the way you can also see the flaws. And I'm still talking us little people and people who hold power, but it is a question of time. Again, time helps us be more educated about who's the majority of the world population right now. And who that majority is who holds the future. No matter if, the oligarchs are 20 and then 10 and then 3, there's numbers in who holds the capacity to think the future. And when you have uh, populations changing drastically in numbers, as is happening today, I see optimism. I see a capacity to change the worldview of our kids, of next generations, of people who are already young adults, and changing the way we see the power dynamics at play. And it's just like a realization of time not being just a short 10 years, but
mm,
it's a million of years, it's thousands of years of human evolution. If we want to continue that evolution, we need to be able to focus on what's dear to us. And us humans means whomever has the capacity to be together and imagine. So it's kind of a very in French, we say fleur bleue, a fairy dust kind of optimism about the future. I'm a realist as well. I know very well that it's not so easy, and we see the aftermath of the power struggles in our world today. But we're also conscious. And I think being clear-eyed about who's holding power over what we're told to do with systems that are supposed to hold of our future means that we can contest whenever it's really going too far. I'm not sure I've answered the answer properly because I completely lost my train of thought, read the comments, and was more interested in continuing the conversation with what I was reading. Um, yeah, I'm not sure I answered the question, but it is
Uh,
paramount that we're all part of the conversation for sure.
No, I think what you drill down. So my question was initially, beyond the intellectual property
Hmm.
conversation, what else should we be revisiting? But I think what I took from that is exactly what we were thinking, which is that as an artistic community, let's not be fatigued by the conversation around intellectual property. Right now, people are putting their whole energy into defending, the creative community
Right, right,
from
right.
that intellectual property vein. And I think I agree with you. Let time settle, let bigger players actually take care, not take care, but let bigger get players engage this because I think in some ways it is fatiguing the
Hmm.
artistic community. It's creating a fear. But I do think that we should, at this point, go to the comments. We have some really excellent questions.
Hmm.
I'll start with the first one from Natasha Canyola. She says that what you've said has been really, really insightful, and she didn't even know the background of generative AI on companies funding artists and technology. So I guess she's just making a comment there on, just how fascinating this conversation has been. From Moahi Michael Matzi, we hear him say that colonialism 2.0 is about to take off in the global south. Um, and it's part of it is that we don't train our own bots, we don't own our own data. He likes the idea, sorry, of local people running and training their own, I guess, local bots and local data. And you're hearing a lot about that around data localization. Perhaps, is there any response to those first provocations?
Yes, the first response that comes to mind is that the African continent has often been at the forefront of technological innovation. And the same like word that I've been repeating over and over, colonialism and power structures have been ensuring that it feels as though it isn't and that it's missing the train. Let me give you a clear example. In the 1990s, the United Nations did an entire white paper on digital divide. And what was really problematic is that to evaluate the digital divide, who had access to technology and who didn't have access, they um, looked at world populations and looked who had access to cell phones. So 1990s cell phones, you're innovating technologically, you have a cell phone. Who has access to cell phones? And African continents always came in first because many people had access to cell phones. They didn't said own a cell phone or have one in your home. Just there were innovative practices of renting a cell phone. Somebody would have a stand in a corner of the street and you could just rent out that cell phone to talk to somebody else. There were a lot of innovative uses of cell phones. So in the world population, in the United States, there were less people who had touched a cell phone in their hands than in a lot of different global South communities, such as Brazil, or many other. And I'm not saying Brazil is in Africa; it's two different, two different sentences. But making sure that different countries of the global South that were not deemed to be technologically innovative with that list suddenly all came in first. And a lot of them, most of them, I think in the top 50, a good chunk of them were African countries because they had innovative practices of how to use a phone that ensured that a lot of people had access or touched a cell phone. And we had a lot of communities in Canada and the United States that didn't. But the white paper said, oh, there's a problem. No, no, no.
Mm.
The tech innovation is owning a phone. So how many people own a phone? And then again, anybody who had a phone per family said we own a phone. But no, no, individually owning a phone. So who's changing the rules all the time to ensure that who is considered technologically innovative suddenly isn't? It's kind of, for me, a caricatural, real way to see who's describing the rules of the game and keeps changing them to ensure that you're never controlling the game. That example for me is the same with the question about colonialism 2.0 is about to take off and creating our own bots. Uh, it's the same as the use of online, not online banking, but online transfer of money, for instance. Uh, so many examples of uh, innovations from the African continent, again, have shown that it has more users than Venmo has. We hear of these companies, but these companies have less users than applications and solutions that are, really innovative because they're thinking about who's going to use them and for what purpose, and not how to make more profit out of these people. So the logic of systems really defines who's going to use it and what for. But again, I think just if we just focus on the African continent, if we just focus on that, it has shown time and time and time again innovation because it's thinking about real use application for real individuals in real contexts. And it's not waiting to be told how to use a system, it's just creating a system that works for communities that need that system to work. I think we should do the same with AI. It doesn't make sense to keep waiting for uses and being part of conversations of companies that clearly don't have the good of the population at mind or at heart. What they want is just profitability. And if we're not going to profit from that profitability, well, at least let's see what AI does well. And what it does well so far, it's find patterns. So in a way, it's not just like creating our bots for sure, but it's not when I'm saying that it's not just focusing on the IP, it's not just letting them settle it. I've missed explain myself. My goal is never to say like just let them do
Mm,
and then we'll step in. You can definitely fight for your IP, and I recommend it. But it's also knowing that you're not alone. IP means theft of creative property, and you can bet that some other bigger players are also going to be fighting. So it doesn't mean like let them fight. It just means sometimes be very mindful and know that time will do its thing. But at the same time, that mindfulness helps you think, okay, what else could I be doing so
mhm,
that I understand who holds the data? Can I create data banks that speak to communities that may have benefit from using generative images in a different light, for instance. Instead of having to spend so much time, I'm sorry, it's a parenthesis within a parenthesis, so I'm going to try to be more succinct. If you're trying to say that AI is going to save you time in generating an image, but if you're not wanting that well-made doctor example before. It's actually taking you so much longer to just generate what you want because you have to use the system the way you're supposed to be using them and then tweak it, tweak it, tweak it, tweak it, tweak it, tweak it, tweak it. So it's a waste of time. And often in my practice, I find it to be a waste of time. It just regurgitates what I don't want it to be. So in a way, fighting against colonialism 2.0 is realizing this and saying, okay, what does it do well? Finding patterns. Do I actually need to buy in all of the images from the internet to do so? Maybe if my goal is to show the bias, but maybe not. Maybe I can have my own images, my own bank of images. Can I share this with communities in a different format and different applications that has been done, by, let's say, OpenAI, to just name a couple of them, or Runway? Do I have to use the same systems? Can I create my own system? And so far, innovation has been always kind of successful when it, especially on the African continent, when it does its own thing and doesn't mind
mm,
whatever it's told it should be doing or not doing to be part of the race. The race is skewed. You have the majority of the population. You have the majority of the innovation. You can think outside the box. The future is ours. It already is. So I just think it's a question of time before some of these companies will backpedal and try to benefit. That's colonialism 2.0. So be mindful of who owns it, and you may just like you don't have to run after the train. You may just realize you can shut down its power and do its own and create your own travel system next to it. The time travel that's going to be created and generated out of the African continent. Forget the train. There's so much innovation that we can think of. I want to see other of your the comments, sorry,
I'll read them out. So there's actually two, and I think we'll use that just to round off our
to
conversation
conclude. Mhm.
up. So we've got Natasha. She again gives a great a comment saying, I love how you proposed a great solution of dealing with the biases of AI on top of the solution to dealing with exclusion from AI. If we don't get a seat at the table, we should just build our own. I think that's really important. And then lastly, Muachi does ask a question. He says, do you think AI as a tool encourages artists to be more creative? Are we entering another realm evolution of artistry?
We are entering another realm of artistry, but it may not be because it's helping us be more creative, but let me be nuanced. I think artists have always been creative with whatever they have at hand. You
Mm,
know, working with clay is mud. Think about it. I'm thinking this out loud because I worked with clay yesterday and I loved it. And I'm just thinking, like, isn't it amazing that we looked at mud and thought, let me do something out of this. So
mm,
artists will do out of things and they will do with things at hand. And they will sometimes learn a realm or a trade like painting or clay or sculpting or, embroidery. They will learn a trade, but sometimes it also comes from looking at leaves and thinking, could I weave them together and do something differently with that? I think artificial intelligence is a tool and it's a medium, a way to create images or um, convey, data into image format or text format or finding patterns in vast amounts of data. So in a way, it is a tool. And artists will look at tools and think, what could I do with that? And sometimes the tool itself becomes the artwork, like sticking a banana on the wall. Like we've seen certain artwork be generated recently that made people speak because the tool or the object becomes the art. Sometimes it's going to be using the tool exactly as expected, like a paintbrush to paint. And sometimes it may be to rethink what you're going to do with the tool, like weaving leaves to create, um, baskets. Anything that you're suddenly, as human species, we've been looking at our surroundings and finding ways to use what's at hand to convey things, meanings, emotions, uh, contradictory thoughts and imaginations. So, what I like about the question too is that it can encourage artists to be more creative, not
mm.
because of what AI is, but because of the fact that it's a new tool available to artists. So, any new tool creates incentive for innovation, for testing it out, for figuring out how what I could do with it. So I love AI just for that. I think it does encourage us to be more creative because we're thinking differently about data and image correlations, and then it forces us to rethink how to use it. And then when we're going to be so used to it, maybe it's not going to be that helping us that much to be creative. Maybe suddenly wood making will become, more creative or helping us to be more creative in a way we've artists have always been out of the conversation. They've always been my joke often that I like to do is that when they say artists will be out of work, I'm like, but we've always been out of work. Like, that's that's the problem of artists. So we kind of know the drill, but at the same time, I think anything changing in our environment is an incentive for creativity. So that's what I really welcome, and it says so much about the societies we're in that even more the reason to look deeply into it.
Well, thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
I think that we have run over
Thank
our time.
you.
We
I
won't be able
know,
to
but
get to
look
the
at
next
these questions. I'm like, they're
questions.
awesome.
But what I love also about that, I think that in calling it artificial intelligence, that also became very intimidating for a lot of artists. And when you use this clay analogy, I really liked it because maybe we just need to call it clay, you know? Maybe we call the AI our own clay, and then it encourages us to say, how do we use it rather than being so terrified, which is what we hear from a community. But just to wrap up, thank you so much, Sandra, for such like a really rich and inspiring conversation. Thank you to everyone online who joined us
Thank
today.
you, guys.
Thank you. This has been the second session in the Electric Africa webinar series leading up to our AI and immersive media convening. Next week, on the 10th of September, we'll be joined by filmmaker and artist Brett Gaylor to discuss AI and artists in practice. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow Electric South on social media for any updates. And we'll also be uploading this video onto YouTube so you're able to revisit everything that Sandra has said. I'm Ajwa Nkoma. It's been a huge pleasure to host you. Thank you again to Sandra. This has been eye-opening. This has been enlightening, encouraging, empowering, and see you all next week.
The pleasure is shared. Thank you all.